Today, I'm joined by Paige Lucia, who is our paid social expert at Namecheap and has over 8 years experience prior to joining us. And I am your host, your interviewer, Emily Jacob. I work in our CRM team at Namecheap, and I'm also organising the Expert Summit. So Paige, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about how to reach your audience through paid social. It's something that I'm absolutely fascinated by and would really love to understand in more detail. Where do people start?
So the best place to start is really by defining your audience. So, you need to know who you want to reach first. A lot of people will start off by starting with the creative, which, they have the creative made, it's there, it's available, and they're like, okay, how do we use it now? But a lot of times that's where you really run into the risk of not resonating well with your target audience. So it's really important to define your audience first. Who are you trying to talk to? Who are you trying to reach? And then create the ad from there. Really customize it to that audience. And a really good example is if you're trying to sell lunch boxes. Who needs a lunchbox, especially during a pandemic? Where are they going? Teachers are still going to school in the US at least. So, you probably want to reach teachers, maybe nurses, frontline responders who are out there every day, still going to work, still, they need to eat. So what are they keeping it in? And then start there. So say you want to reach frontline responders, nurses. You position the ad, you create the copy that speaks directly to nurses, and that gives you leverage to even do things that think outside the box. Like maybe you want to give back to first responders during the pandemic who've been working so hard. So you target people who have in their job descriptions, it's labeled their job title as a nurse or EMT or a firefighter, and you offer them a discount code maybe. But you can't, that's not something you would want to offer to everyone if you had that creative first.
Yeah.
So defining your audience first really allows you to customize that creative, which will make it resonate more with your target audience. And odds are you'll do much better on your ROI.
Okay. Sorry, what would you say? If you just define ROI, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, your return on investment. The money you're putting into your ads, you're going to see that money come back more when that ad resonates more with people.
Sure, great. So you've got your audience, you've got your nurses, your EMTs, and how do you know which platform to put that creative to?
Sure. So yeah, all the different platforms, there's definitely better platforms to reach different people. So Facebook is kind of our go-to, our standard. Everyone who's a millennial or older pretty much has one, So, and again, it depends on your product. But, if you're trying to reach nurses, Pinterest is a very female-dominated platform. It's very DIY. So if your lunch boxes can be customized, that's a great platform to target nurses on. They're looking for that customization. They're looking for fun. And it's largely a female profession right now. Good way to reach nurses. Reach out to Pinterest on top of Facebook. If your product is more visual, Instagram is a great place for that. Instagram is very visual heavy. Obviously, it's focused on photography. So you want to use, especially if you have very strong creative, Instagram is fantastic. TikTok and Snapchat, they're a younger platforms, younger audience. So if you're trying to reach, teenagers, or you're trying to reach, college kids, TikTok and Snapchat are probably an addition that you'd want to add on to Facebook.
And is it wise to be on more platforms and not just focus on one?
It depends on your budget, as well as, really what your goal is. You don't really want to spread yourself too thin, but you want to make sure that you're on the right platform and it makes sense for your product and brand. So for example, Namecheap, it's a great one. Twitter, we also use Twitter pretty heavily because it's a very tech-driven platform. So if the platform makes sense, definitely try it out, test it if you have the budget to do so. But if, it doesn't really seem to fit your brand or the product, don't do it. There's no reason.
What kind of budget do you need to test whether or not something will work?
Also depends on your audience size.
Is every answer page going to be, it depends on your audience?
Yeah, it depends on the audience. So, another thing with budget, like I said, you don't want to spread yourself too thin. That's probably the biggest mistake a lot of people make, is that they either try and go across too many platforms and have way too small of a budget to do so, or their audience is way too large and they're really not moving the needle with the budget that they have. So, and that also is different by platform. So Facebook is typically has, pretty large audiences. And again, this depends on who you're trying to reach. But because Facebook was kind of the first social media platform, a lot of people started there. It's naturally going to have a larger audience. Twitter, depending on your product, also has very large audiences. And they have a slightly different targeting as well. Like each platform has slightly different targeting. They all have the basic interests, behavioral targeting that you can use, demographics, gender targeting, age targeting. That's all across all the platforms. But, where Facebook has interest targeting and behavioral targeting, Twitter also has conversation targeting, hashtag targeting. So that creates a much larger audience than on Facebook in some scenarios, depending on what conversation you're trying to reach or what hashtag you're trying to use.
Yeah.
Twitter is also really great for real time. So, if you're trying to use the Emmys or the Oscars or, some sporting event, Twitter is a great platform to kind of utilize that event targeting as well. Because you can target by event on Twitter. And also on Pinterest, you can use keywords. So they all differ slightly, and that kind of goes into your audience size and what capabilities you have there. But you don't want to spread yourself too thin across any of the platforms. For example, on Facebook, the minimum audience size I would recommend is 250,000 people because you don't want to go too small. You want to make sure that you're not reaching too narrow of an audience, because then you'll also increase your costs, which is something to be mindful of, because you have less of a pool of people to reach. You have your CPMs are going to increase, the cost to reach.
Sorry, what's the CPM?
It's the cost per impression. So cost per 1,000 impressions, sorry. And so that will increase the smaller your audience is, most likely.
Right.
And so, it's just something to really be mindful of, is that you're not trying to reach too small of an audience, because you're not going to get the same volume, the same kind of result that you would if you went broader.
But I guess that broader audience still needs to be one that wants your product. It's still got to be the right audience for you.
Definitely. It needs to be relevant. So, and on Facebook, you can layer targeting. So a good way of narrowing too broad of an audience is to layer that targeting. So say you're trying to reach nurses, use nurses in the job title, and then narrow that targeting to, if you can only ship within the US, add in the US. If you are trying to reach a specific region, only use those regions, only target those regions. But also you can add in other interests or locations like hospitals. Yeah. So you can play around with it, and there's different ways you can also exclude. So on Facebook, you can add in exclusions. And so you can know you're not reaching people you're definitely not trying to reach.
Awesome. That's really interesting. Thank you. And how would you how would you decide which, if you've only got a small budget and you know your audience, how do you decide where exactly to spend that money? Which are the factors that you would take into account?
Yeah, so it's definitely, audience size. If you're trying to run across multiple platforms, take a look at the audience size on each platform, because odds are it'll be different. So the amount of nurses you may reach on Twitter is going to be very different than the amount of nurses you may be reaching on Facebook.
So go into each of the platforms, put in the criteria that you're looking at, and then see what the audience size is that they're going to give you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And, go with where, the audience, your audience is. If it's Pinterest, if you're adding in those nurse type, criteria in there, and you're coming back with a great audience, and maybe it involves a bit of testing, like say Facebook and Pinterest both have, the audience size there, that's where they are. Not so much on Twitter, Snapchat, you can throw that out the window. But, if you're debating between Facebook and Pinterest, take a week, take a little bit of budget and test it out.
Is that what a test should involve? About a week's length?
I would say a week to 2 weeks, again, depending on your budget, and what, the audience size. If the audience is larger and, or you have more budget, I would definitely give it maybe like 2 weeks. A big thing to, remember is that the platforms do have a learning period. They have a learning phase. So whenever you launch a new campaign, you have to be mindful of this learning phase, because if you're trying to just run a campaign for 3 days across any of the platforms, you're not going to get results. You're not going to see it really perform, because 3 days is not enough time for any of the platforms to really optimize and ramp up and learn the user's actions in regards to your ads.
Oh, that's interesting. That's entirely different to what I'd heard a few years ago, to be fair, that you could just do something and try it for 24 hours and then pull it if it didn't work. But you're saying that that's not the case anymore at all.
Yeah, and that was a thing a few years ago. Micro boosting was very popular. Small budgets for a couple of days, especially on Twitter. But it really is not recommended anymore, because of these learning phases, because it does take the platforms a certain amount of time to learn how users are going to react to your ads, to really ramp up. Facebook, for example, will tell you when an ad has exited a learning phase or an audience has exited a learning phase. It'll say learning phase exactly in the platform.
That's helpful.
It is. But it's definitely something to be mindful of, because if it's still in learning phase, then the platform isn't optimizing how it was created to. It's still learning, and that it's hard to make any sort of determination when the platform doesn't even know.
Yep. And if you've got a very small budget, how would you advise someone go about starting to learn how to spend it? I guess one of the key worries might be that it suddenly kind of expands and you suddenly spent more money than you actually had available. Yep. Are you able to make sure that there's a cap on the spending?
Yeah. So across all the platforms, there's different levers you can pull. A lot of them Facebook offers lifetime spend or daily spend. If you use daily spend on Facebook, then you can add a max campaign cap to ensure that you don't go over that amount. Twitter will spend by daily spend. You can also add a max campaign cap, but it's very important to also include that daily spend, because then the platform won't spend over that either. Same with Pinterest, and they have those. It's just important to remember to use them, because that's where a lot of people get tripped up and they end up being like, whoa, how did I spend that much money? I was only using $10 a day or $20 a day, but then they forgot to add the cap. And so then all of a sudden it just keeps running.
And when should small business owners start thinking about using paid social? Should they be using it at the beginning, or should they be waiting until they have built up their own audiences first?
I mean, audiences should definitely come first. But it's, paid social is the way to go these days. Since all of the platforms have adjusted their algorithms, organic posts are not being seen as much as they used to be. Now it's just top of mind, most popular, whatever the platform decides to show you. So a lot of times organic posts don't get seen at all. The organic view rate has dropped significantly. So paid ads are really the main way of getting any social media content out there, which is a bit unfortunate, but it's the way to go. If you have the budget right off the bat, I would say do it right off the bat. At the very least, it will build awareness. And then once you have that awareness, especially if you're driving to a website, then you can start using retargeting tools from that website and retargeting is a great way to really reach and push people through the conversion funnel, because they're already interested enough that they looked at the website.
Yeah.
So then you send them another ad. I mean, I'm a victim of this as well, so many times. So
me too.
I'm sure we all are. You just keep thinking about it, and then they're like, oh, hey, here it is again. So definitely start from the beginning. You might not see the ROI immediately, but you will see it. You just kind of have to keep up with it, and don't lose hope. It's definitely the way to go, though. And even from just a brand awareness level, especially as a small business just starting, it really helps grow that for you.
So you've mentioned budget several times, and I'm going to put you on the spot now. If you were a small business, and you were starting out and trying to build brand awareness through paid social, say your audience, you knew were on Facebook and you wanted to use Facebook as your challenge, what would be the budget that you would say, go test this campaign for 2 weeks and see if it works?
So that would be unique to every business.
You're going to say that.
Yeah, it's not a simple cut and dry answer. It's dependent on lots of things. There's never a point where you can't, like, the platforms will take your money no matter what. So if you only have, $200 to spend for a week, you can still do it. They won't tell you no. They won't come back with saying it's not enough. But this is where share of voice comes into play, and making sure that, you're reaching a certain percentage of the audience, basically, to move the needle. And so share of voice is really important in terms of determining that budget. So based on your audience size, you can take a look at your audience size and kind of estimate how much of that audience you want to reach. A minimum as best practice is 25% if you really want to move that needle. But you can go lower. It's all, there's never a point where they're going to say no. It's just a lot of paid social is about best practice and following those best practices and making sure that, you have enough budget to move that needle and make a presence and have a presence on the platform for your audience.
And then is retargeting a further budget, or does it?
It is, yeah.
It is, right.
It's completely separate, and that's also dependent by platform. We can upload the same audience list for website visitors on Facebook and Twitter and come back with completely different audience sizes that they matched them with. And that's very dependent on your business as well. Yeah. So, Facebook, just because that's been around the longest, and a lot more people have Facebook than they have Twitter, or are active on Facebook than Twitter. Facebook is typically a better platform for retargeting. Twitter also has it, but it's just the same as creating the audiences from the beginning. It's uploading the audiences, seeing where you're at with that match rate, and then moving from there.
And you mentioned earlier that some of the younger audiences would be more likely to be on Snapchat and TikTok. I wasn't really aware that they do paid social. So how does it work with those newer platforms?
Yeah, so Snapchat actually has had advertising for quite a while, and it's evolved over the years. But they have everything from, ads in between viewing your friends' stories to you can have ads, and they have these like TV episodes now, and so you can sponsor that. You can have a whole kind of mini episode takeover in Snapchat. Wow. Obviously those are much more expensive, and usually bigger companies do that. But it is still an option. And TikTok just launched their advertising platform, so it's still very new. Targeting there is probably very limited. And with targeting a younger audience below 18, you also have to be wary of certain caveats, like, absolutely no alcohol, no tobacco products. Like, you have to be very aware of the limitations there and making sure that you're following them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess then it's a case of waiting until that platform becomes a bit richer with how it works from a paid social perspective, rather than necessarily getting in early.
Yeah, it's always good to test out. Reddit is the same way. Reddit just launched their advertising as well, and it's still very new. it's a new platform. There are limitations to their targeting. It's not going to be as sophisticated. Their reporting is not going to be as sophisticated as Facebook or Twitter. But Reddit, new platforms like Reddit and TikTok, they value that feedback. And, it is interesting to get in early, get a benchmark. And then, if it's not working for you, then, try again in a year, maybe, or 6 months when they've developed a little more, and see what it does for you then.
Awesome. Is there anything else that you'd like to add around Paid Social, Paige? It's really fascinating to me. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about it for much longer, but I think that's a good place to start.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. That has been mind bending for me in terms of my other business, of how I will maybe start to think about investing in paid social. So that's been really helpful to me. I hope it's been really helpful to our viewers. Thank you so much, Paige.
Thank you.